So thank you for joining us today. My name is Valerie Brown. I'm with United Policyholders. Today's workshop is going to be on deadlines and decisions at the 1-year anniversary, and we're also going to talk a little bit about healing and dealing as we get closer to that anniversary.
Is United Policyholders an insurance company or?
No, we are a not-for-profit charity. We serve all 50 states, and we are your resource for insurance and disaster recovery. So we're tagline not-for-profit, not for sale. We're funded by donations and grants. We partner with professionals across the country that are experts in their field. So we have an expert with us today that's going to share information about the work he does and more granular details about what's involved in this topic. But we are strictly funded by those things. We're not trying to sign you up for a lawsuit. We're not doing any of that stuff. And so just a bit of information about me. I am my wildfire, I was the wildfire recovery expert who handled a recovery center in San Diego in 2007. I spent 3 years helping 700 people get back home. And UP was one of my partners, and I ended up liking working with them so much, I ended up volunteering. So I live in San Diego, drive up here, do this workshop once a month, and I've been doing this for UP for about 4 years on a monthly basis with different disasters. So, UP, here we go. Make my thing go here. Sorry, I'm very good at this technology stuff. There we go.
Your name again? I'm sorry.
Valerie Brown. I think I'm on one of the slides you'll have on your email.
Okay.
Yeah, so UP does not give legal advice. It's only, the presentation is general guidance only. Obviously, we don't endorse or warrant the quality of services of any speakers or any sponsors on our page, and our speakers are volunteering their services to be an educator to you for this. So we appreciate so much having you. So, as I said, my name is Valerie Brown. Eric will be presenting at the Thousand Oaks workshop this afternoon. And Masood is the principal and an attorney with Some Point Health Adjusters. So he's volunteering his team. Himself and his team services today. We have 2 of them in the back. We'll be able to answer questions for you afterwards. And then one of the things to call out, because we're getting to the 1-year anniversary, we typically do a survey that's on our website at this address to gather information about insurance and recovery problems. And then we take this information to the insurance commissioners in each of the states that we're operating in to help them look at the problems people are having so they can come up with legislative issues. So for example, with the Thomas fire and the fires in Napa in 2017, one of the things we codified with the data was that people, it took too long to rebuild. It was taking more than 24 months. And so that was one of the fixes that the legislature passed this past year, right before your fires, was to make that extended 36 months to give people time to get through the rebuilding process. And so that information is just to help identify those issues, and your identity is kept confidential. So if you receive the link, please fill it out. We appreciate it so much. We need to have enough people fill it out so we have statistically solid data to be able to take back to the state.
The 36 months is to begin to rebuild.
We're going to talk about those issues. I'm just running through my fine print at the beginning. So your policy deadlines are going to vary by company and policy form. Some are extended by operation of law that we're going to talk about today. Others can be extended by voluntarily. Some will not be extended. And so you have to clarify this information with your company and your adjuster as soon as possible. Deadlines that should not matter yet. ALE, so you have 36 months if you're acting in good faith and with reasonable diligence, and extensions and you can get extensions for good cause. Additional living expenses. Collecting your RCV, you have 36 months for that. Claims related to a state declared emergency, so that's the 24 months plus extensions for cause. And then filing a lawsuit, you should not be worrying about that related to those issues, lowballing, delays, and fair claims handling. Deadlines that may matter. Proof of your loss. What deadlines does your policy contain? If it's 1 year, does your adjuster and insurer intend to enforce it? If you were paid a portion of your contents without an inventory but are considering itemizing to collect 100%. If that deadline is a year, you need to work on that. For information, November 5th, it's a Monday. First Monday in November, we'll be doing a 3-hour conscience workshop at Malibu Lake in their community center to walk you through and help you build at least 4 rooms on your inventory. So we'll go in with pricing for basic things, and then you'll be able to, if you haven't finished that, you'll be able to make a lot of progress on that. It's the first Monday in November, and I want to say it's the 5th, 5:30 to 8:30 at Malibu Lake.
November 5th is a Tuesday.
Oh, then it's the 4th. I'm really
Fourth.
sorry about that.
Fourth,
Okay, there we go. So it's the 4th.
5:30 to 8:30 p.m.
There we go.
And should we bring our computers?
Yes, if you have your computer, bring your computer. If you're working paper, and we'll have paper copies as well.
Paper?
I'll have paper copies of spreadsheets for people to write on, people who don't use a computer. So we'll have that. And so, anything that you want to discuss as I'm talking, please stand up and jump in. I'm just going to run through in the interest of time and keep everyone on, and then that way we can get to your questions as well. So to do before 11/8/2019, and this is what we'll talk about at the end, recognizing that disaster anniversaries tend to bring up emotions and anxiety. You're going to reread your policy, your dex page, double check the math, the limits adjusted for extended coverage endorsements, inflation protection. If you haven't already, request a complete claim summary of all amounts paid today, correct any errors. On our website, and actually it was a Thomas survivor who put it together for us, we've got a nifty tool he created. He's a CPA, and he created the tool that allows you to track exactly what you've been paid in which bucket of funds. So if you don't have that, please go to the website and pull that off. It's a really nice resource.
Do you know what the link is?
I can look it up afterwards. It's that presentation Mike did.
Okay, thank you.
Keep documenting your cooperation and diligence in a claim diary. If you don't have a claim diary, we have journals that we can give you in the back. And short written communications with your insurer. If they prefer to do business by phone, we suggest you at least recap your conversation with them, what your understanding of it is, in writing in an email or a letter, and send that to them, and then just put a little tagline on there. If you would like to correct anything that I've stated here, please respond to me in writing, so at least you documented what you understand the conversation was. Because I know a lot of adjusters, they're busy and they would prefer to just handle it on the phone. They're not going to necessarily send you a follow-up email or letter. So if you take that upon yourself, at least you're documenting there. If you're substantially underinsured, review our guidance and consult with an experienced policyholder or attorney or a public adjuster to help you with that. Sample requests for deadline extensions, and this is for those points that are, they were asking like for your contents, your dwelling, suit against us. The letter is a Word document on our website. This is basically the language that we have that you can borrow. So get your proof in. If you have no extensions granted and there's a 1-year deadline, get them in. You want to be cooperating. You want to meet the obligations that you have. Remember, this insurance claim is a business contract, so it's a business negotiation, and so you want to be meeting your obligations as well as expecting them to meet their obligations to you. So remedies if you're underinsured, and this is one of those things for, how many of you actually know if you're underinsured at this point? I know you do, yes. And how many of you are at the point in the building where you're not quite sure if you're going to be underinsured? You're not even there yet, right?
We just lost exterior.
So yeah, so you probably are underinsured with,
No,
no, you're good?
we just can't get it, so. We
Who's the
can't.
carrier?
California firm. You could have guessed.
Yes.
Yes.
We'll get there, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're underinsured, so you're going to find and use leverage to convince the carrier to pay above the policy limits. If it's their fault, if they gave you reason to believe your policy limits were adequate. We actually had in August in Thousand Oaks, we had 2 ladies, same insurance agent, who took it upon themselves to deny them their request to increase their coverage and told them they were adequately insured. So if you got that magic bullet, that's a great thing to help you make the case that you did your due diligence and they took it upon themselves to make sure you were adequately insured. It could be their mistake, it could be faulty underwriting, it could be that you reported you needed, in addition to your house, you had an extra 1,500 square feet. the policy is only looking at the 2,200 you had originally, even though you reported it, it's just an error on their fault that they didn't include that in their calculations. Like I said before, they undertook the duty to set the limits adequately. Everett versus State Farm is a decision that came out in 08, 09? 09. That basically said you as the insurer are responsible for setting the valuation on your insurance policy, making sure you're adequately insured. Even though you're not insurance professionals, it's still the court put the burden on you for that. And so, you know, if they've taken that duty off of your plate and taken responsibility for it themselves, then if you're underinsured, that would be something that they are actionable for. And for that, you know, basically you're seeking a retroactive reformation of the policy limits, and you know, you would be offering to pay the difference in the premiums if they will basically make you whole. Do you have any words of wisdom on that one?
Well, just depends if you're underinsured. It's a process. It's tough to do it on your own, but there are some remedies. You can also approach the Department of Insurance and seek their assistance. They've got a mediation program.
Mediation program is fabulous.
So,
Well, what if you've already contacted the Department of Insurance 6 months ago and it's still on?
have you filed an official complaint?
Yes. 6 months ago.
You just unfortunately have to go through that administrative process. What you want to try and focus on is make sure you've got specific regulatory violations that you can cite to, and just engage your investigator at the DOI. They are overwhelmed the last 2 or 3 years and been quite busy for the insurance industry as a whole. They'll get through it. It's a process.
And pushing for mediation as
Well,
Masood
that's the
said.
next thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to hog the room, but everyone has their specific issues, so.
Yeah, mediation is a good remedy. It's
Well,
what
that's
it works.
remedy.
I think you have to specifically request it.
With
There's
the
actually,
Department of Insurance, I
Yes.
see fair side.
with the Department of Insurance. They have a link on their website.
Yeah, so that would be your logical next step for that if you're stuck there.
Remediation,
Mediation.
mediation.
Do you need a policyholder attorney to do that?
No, the Department of Insurance, I'm sorry.
Actually, if you're represented by counsel at the Department of Insurance mediation program, I understand that the carrier will not engage in
That's
mediation.
just-
So you probably want to do it yourself or through another representative. You would engage a policyholder attorney if mediation doesn't work, you don't get it resolved, and go to the next step.
Right, and so that would fall more here for, you know, suing your agent, broker, insurer as an individual or in a group suit, or another at-fault party. So say example, another at-fault party would be like.
Well, like in
with-
Malibu, they're suing Southern California Edison, or
Yeah.
everyone concerned with the fire, so there's groups of attorneys that are representing many people in Malibu to sue Southern California Edison. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I was gonna give the example of Paradise where PG&E has
Yeah.
admitted fault in
Yes.
theirs.
Yeah.
I have one other thing to add, just another thing to keep in mind. If you have a dispute as to valuation, there should be a mechanism in your policy called the appraisal provision. And if you invoke that, it's somewhat like an informal arbitration.
That's where you have to get somebody,
Right.
because that's still standards.
Well, appraisals are a little tricky. You can't appraise coverage issues, and typically you can't appraise causation issues, but it's purely limited to valuation. So you hire an appraiser at your own expense. The insurance company hires an appraiser at their own expense. There's an agreement between those two appraisers, and they're not real estate appraisers, they're insurance appraisers. So if they come to an agreement, that sets the value of the loss, and typically the insurance company is bound to honor that valuation. They may apply the terms of the policy to it. If the two appraisers cannot agree, then they appoint an umpire. If they cannot agree on an umpire, they'll petition the board to get an umpire assigned, and then an agreement between two of the three will set the value.
So the first thing is to have the DOI request mediation.
That's one of your options. I don't think it's necessarily the first thing.
Appraisal department.
Appraisal is generally recommended only for valuation disputes. So if you've got a
How do you
coverage dispute,
evaluate scope damage if they're saying they deny the coverage?
if they're denying coverage for it, that's going to be a little bit trickier because that goes more along the lines of causation. What I'm talking about is if you're telling the insurance company it's $100 to paint this room, they're saying no, it's $20 to paint this room. That's a valuation dispute. If they just turn around and say, well, we don't care if it's $100 to paint the room or 20, it's just not covered, that's a coverage issue. And that's something that typically cannot be appraised.
How do you get around that?
You unfortunately seek counsel from an attorney, sue your insurance company for breach of contract, and breach of the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing.
Because when it says in the smoke portion, it's just what you were saying about iron and all that, those are the two remedies.
Well, generally the remedies are appraisal, mediation is a voluntary process. Nobody's compelled to go to it, nobody's compelled to resolve it. If you can get parties on the table and work something out, that's the mediation round. Beyond that, obviously.
What if it's in the policy that these are the ways you have to go about?
The policy has the appraisal clause. I mean, you can invoke that at any time.
Okay.
I don't believe it has a mediation provision.
California-
Mediation program is just the Department of Insurance.
California Fair Plan did an appraisal of my home, and it was much higher than my insurance. So they just paid me my full policy limits, and they said that's all you get. But what I'm hearing you saying is because they were underinsured me, their appraiser said my home was worth about 40% more than they had insured it for.
They did what you want.
Yes, in Berkeley Grant.
So, just to clarify, you said Fair Plan appraised your home prior to the policy
No.
being issued or
No,
after the loss?
After the loss.
Well, that's different,
Oh,
because
oh.
if your policy was issued at a certain dollar amount and Fair Plan determined that, that's a different issue than an appraisal after the fact. That's a claims valuation, that's not an appraisal.
Oh, that's what I was, okay, that's what I was, so, but there is a claims, so then I have something I could do with it, or I can't?
Well, again, it depends on how California Fair Plan issued you your policy. Typically, the burden of proof is on you to set your insurance limits. You're responsible for that. And if you didn't take any affirmative steps to tell your agent, broker, or California Fair Plan, give me a certain amount of insurance, and say, for instance, like you were giving the example that someone said, I'm not gonna, you don't need that much insurance, then I think you've got a basis, but beyond that.
Yeah, California Fair Plan also has a cap on the amount of insurance that they will write. So if you have a home that's in excess of that, even if you needed more insurance to properly insure your home, California Fair Plan will only issue, say, up to 1.5 million, where if your home is in excess of that, it wouldn't matter how you asked for insurance or applied for insurance, or if they underinsured you. Essentially, you can only get to whatever it is that max is that they offer. And oftentimes here, what our experience is that it was at 1.5 million. So a lot of people were just by that nature underinsured. And that goes across the board, not just for the structure, but it would be 1.5 for a cap on everything across the board, contents, other structures, landscaping, all of that included. So with California Fair Plan, unfortunately, they just have that as a limitation, regardless of what the exposure is to your property and all of the other things.
Is that a current
Structure
number?
included.
When you-
Excuse me?
Is that a current number, the 1.5? when you
That's
insure
from what
them?
our experience is in adjusting a number of these fair plan losses.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So hitting the steps here, you're gonna check your policy for obvious errors. Like I said, it could be the wrong address, wrong square footage. The error is not your fault. You have a case for increasing your limits to where they should have been. Step 2, calculate the cost to rebuild as it was. And we talked about this in other workshops, the idea that you're insured for not what it costs to rebuild the house now. You're insured, you know, you might decide you're building a different house. You know, you're building same footprint, but different design. So you're insured to replace the house exactly as it was. So if you had a masonry chimney, but you're rebuilding and putting in one that's, you know, just more of a drop-in, that masonry chimney is obviously much more expensive than the one you're putting in now. So your valuation for your policy for that rebuild of that one component is going to be much higher for this piece. And so those are dollars that obviously if you're replacing it with something of lesser value, that'll go into your rebuild for other things. It kind of balances out the pot. Step 3, review your history of how, when your policy limits were set. Did you remodel, refinance? Did you change insurers and agents? Did something trigger you to contact your insurer for reassurance? I was talking to one of my, another volunteer in the San Diego area who lost her house in 2003, and she said she just got a wild hair about 3 months before her fire. It was time to renew her policy, and so she went in and demanded to raise her policy limits, and they told her no. And so she wrote, and she said it was the weirdest thing. She said, I never do this, but she wrote, she was so irritated, she wrote on her receipt that they both had a carbon copy of, I asked for, and you refused to. She was so mad. She said, I wrote that on the receipt. They had a copy and I had a copy. Obviously, I lost my copy in the fire, but for some reason they still had that, so they reformed my policy. And so when you're not getting, obviously going forward, anytime you're not getting satisfaction, you're documenting everything in multiple places. I mean, in any language in your policy or sales material where the insurer undertakes that duty to set the limits. The big thing with remodeling is what happened with that information that the agent had. So in 2007, I had friends who remodeled, reported it, but it never made it onto their policy, that their square footage had increased and any of that stuff. So, and it was an error on the insurer's fault. But if you didn't report it, then they're not going to know that, and so there's no obligation. So you're paying premiums on that original house you had, even if you double size. And so some people think, well, I don't need to report it, but any of those changes, obviously, we need to do.
Most people don't realize, but the policy also has a provision specifically in the imposing a duty upon you to report major remodels and renovations. So if you don't report them, you could be in breach of your own policy itself.
And it's interesting, if you've remodeled, I had a friend who remodeled, got their occupancy permit on a Saturday, moved in on a Saturday, our fire was Sunday in 2007. They just walked through with the agent on Friday, reset their evaluation, they knew what the costs were to rebuild. As soon as the fire hit, obviously the cost of rebuilding jacked up. China was importing concrete at a tremendous rate from the US, so those prices had quadrupled. There were no contractors to be had, so even though at Friday she was adequately insured, by Monday she was underinsured about $300,000. Just with the way the market was for rebuilding at that point. And it was an interesting situation to realize that there are things outside of anybody's control that when these happen. Step 4, if possible, seek out and compare notes with other property owners who are underinsured by your same agent and or insurance company. Like I said, the 2 neighbors that I met at Thousand Oaks in August, it wasn't until they were sitting in one of our workshops that they saw us talk about talking to each other, and so they opened their books, so to speak, and said, oh, you're with this company, I'm with this company, oh, you have the same agent. And then they were talking about their strategies, and they realized, what was interesting is they bought their house in 2 different, over a span of 10 years, so bought them at different times. They were both insured for exactly the same amount. Even though, it was the one who had the value, the other one when she bought her house, that was the value the agent gave her for the house. And there was no rhyme or reason to it, it's just whatever they assigned. So even though you're obligated to set that valuation, obviously somebody was doing some of that as well. And see if others got their agent to retroactively increase their limits. Typically those have a non-disclosure agreement signed there. We found people say, I've been made happy, and that's all they can tell you, but that's what that means. If someone who was underinsured is suddenly moving forward and everything's smooth, that's typically what that is. Step 5, make a clear written demand that your insurance company or agent honor the promises that were made to put you back where you were before the policy, and go up the chain of command, take all steps necessary to enforce that demand. We ask that you be polite and firm, because sometimes the person you're talking to doesn't have the ability to do what you're asking, and so you're asking to go up the chain to the manager. In 2007, I went all the way to the CEO because I was a little cranky. But just work your way up politely and firmly, stating your case, having your documentation, and just keep going up there until you get the resolution, hopefully, that you're seeking. Let them know you're uninsured through no fault of your own. Tell them exact amounts by which you are underinsured if you know. Provide them with that documentation. And if they respond by sending you a written questionnaire with questions to get at how your limits were set, you're going to see step 6 here. So you're going to consult with someone before you do your recorded statement, or you provide those answers. And part of it's just that this is stepping it up to the next level, and so you need to be very clear and exact and precise. And I don't, we're gonna look at some of the questions that you might see, and they're very nuanced and complicated. And it's not something when you're trying to be a contractor for yourself and a personal shopper to replace everything you've got and handling your insurance claim. Oh yeah, you've got your own normal life, and so you're cooking and whatever you have to do to live, to basically have a life, keep your body going, and you work and whatever you're doing, and there's too many jobs on your plate at this time. So, be aware of those times when you need to seek expert help. And so here's an example, and this is why you have your handout here, of what types of questions were. And so, how, this is actually from the Thomas fire, I believe, or from the Napa fires. So if you look at those types of questions, did you provide all the information to the sincere insurance agent or any member of their staff, and what did they provide you? And then this basic, think about it, when you bought your house, you had to get insurance, right? So your realtor contacted your insurance agent and gave them the information that you have from, purchasing your house to get your policy set. You may or may not remember how much square footage you have. You certainly aren't looking at finishings and fixtures and all those things that look at what rebuilding your house would be, because most policies are written for more minor losses, not a federally declared disaster that takes out 800 homes. And then it's just, that's not what the vehicle is intended to be. It's what, unfortunately, the reality is, but it's not exactly what it's intended to be. And so as you look at these questions, you can see that some of these things would be problematic, like question 23. For the house that I own in San Diego, I never made any additions, remodels, or major repairs to my house. So my answer without thinking would probably be no. The house that I live in has had 3 major remodels and additions to it. One of them is unpermitted. And so, there are so many ways I could get myself in trouble on this question by just not understanding the nuance of what they want. Because me reading this, you're asking me, have I ever? No, I haven't. Has my house had that? And that's really what the question is. But the question is directed to you as the owner of the property. And so understanding that nuance is really important. And then obviously, the red questions are the kind of the danger zone questions. So after you purchase it, they typically mail you every year that opportunity. Here's your notice of your claim. If you're doing electronically, they're sending to you electronically. If you log in and you never look at your email messages, you might have 5 years piled up there, which is where I was before the 2007 fires. I just didn't know that when I set up automatic billing, everything went there. And so I didn't know that because I didn't acknowledge or challenge it, I had agreed to accept those valuations for what they were. And then you have the opportunity, of course, if you disagree with what you've got or you want to raise them, it's on you to do that. So litigation options. So individual or group lawsuit. You could do a suit versus a utility or another at-fault party. There are theories for asserting liability against an agent, broker, insurer, or vendor for underinsuring a home. Those include breach of contract, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, misrepresentation, negligence, a defective product. This is one of the legal cases for you to be aware of, Fitzpatrick versus Hayes from 1997. As a general proposition, an insurance agent does not have a duty to volunteer to an insured that the latter should procure additional or different insurance. The rule changes when, but only when, one of these 3 things happen. They misrepresent the nature, extent, or scope of the coverage being offered or provided. There's a request or an inquiry by you, the insured, for a particular type or extent of coverage. And the agent assumes an additional duty by either express agreement or holding themselves out as having expertise in a given field of insurance being sought. So example for this, one of the fires that I recently volunteered was the Lilac Fire in Fallbrook. And so I had a client who retired and they had a hobby farm, right? But it was a home that just had a barn. And what the insurance they were provided was an agricultural policy, which was not the right vehicle for what they wanted, but their agent represented it to them as this is the only vehicle that you have available for coverage. And so they're in the they're in the litigation process now to resolve that, because they were sold something that was not what they actually asked for or they intended to have a need for. Helpful policy language. That limit of liability shown on your DEX page for coverage A will be revised at each policy anniversary to reflect the change in the replacement cost of your dwelling as identified in the policy declarations. So this is where the insurer has contractually obligated themselves to increase the policy limit to keep pace with the rate of change in the replacement cost of the dwelling. So a reality check on that, it's whatever formulation they use for that is something they have determined in-house. It doesn't have any bearing on what the market is for buying and selling houses. It doesn't necessarily tie into new construction costs. It's a different animal, and so when you look at those things, it's not apples to apples. And so this is a USA suit filed on behalf of 2017 North Bay fire survivors by a firm there. It's the new tool used to estimate your home's rebuilding costs. This talks about Xactimate, and this is where they have the, they've declared in the policy that this is what they use and this is what they use. So I'm insured, full disclosure, I'm insured by USAA, and I argue with them extensively on Xactimate. I've done the detailed survey, I've done the online survey. I actually worked with a general contractor who had an Xactimate license, and I went through to figure out with his software, doing it exactly with somebody who did this professionally, because all he did were disaster rebuilds. Would Xactimate cover me to value? It never penciled out for what I found out were my true rebuilding costs after the 2007 fire. And that's where I got a little cranky with the CEO of USAA and was on multiple calls with him, because it didn't allow me to insure to value precisely. And so I had to advocate, and finally they just got tired of arguing with me and they let me set my value. Because I told them I was responsible anyway versus State Farm, so why not let me take that risk? And now they don't send me this anymore, they just call and say, would you like to set your rates this year? I'm like, yes. And
Well,
I
how
pay.
can you do that? So how do you figure out what you're gonna set it at?
Because I work with disaster survivors in California almost on a yearly basis. So I know pretty precisely what it would be, and I also know what the differential is. So I feel very comfortable with what I set, but it's only because I do this, I'm in this space.
And they
on an
base your
annual
insurance,
basis.
your policy amount, your premium amount on what you tell them?
I'm telling them what I want to be insured to for square footage.
Okay, and then they adjust your...
Yes, and they charge me a lot of money, and I pay them a lot of money just to get what I want.
Understood.
But, I'm a unicorn in that I'm tracking this. I mean, I'm probably, all of you work in this space, we're much more aware of what that cost is. And before, October 21st, 2007, I had no idea. Nor did I want to.
Most of us had no idea about our insurance, right?
No, it's just something I paid because I had to have it. The he said, she said. I asked for full replacement coverage. The agent said that's what I'm buying. You have no written record of the conversation. If this is your scenario and your policy language is not helpful, it will be hard to find a good attorney to take your case. And that's where those tools, like Masood said, being able to go to CDI, filing a request for assistance, using mediation, using all the tools at your disposal to help move this along. One of the things to do is you can elect to replace versus rebuild. So you have that right in the California code. Having said that, most out-of-state adjusters don't know California law. The insurance commissioner always puts out a bulletin to all the insurers who operate in the state, making sure that they know what they're supposed to train their agents to. It doesn't necessarily click, because the reality is, if you're based in Texas and you're handling 5 different claims across the country, 5 different disasters, you might slip and say the wrong one, or you're just, you've taken 3 calls from Arkansas and now you got a California client, and so you're just not thinking. So take that opportunity when they tell you no, to say in California, I do have this right. And that's why it's so important to know what your rights are as an insured in the state of California. Buying a replacement home. So you have to reach that agreement with your insurance company on the dollar amount it would theoretically cost if you did rebuild that exact same home that was destroyed. This would include your code upgrade, extended benefits, like those are available. And generally, this is what they owe you up to policy limits. And being able to buy a replacement house if you're underinsured is a way to cut out the hassle of rebuilding and be able to get moving.
What is your time limit on replacement from the date of loss?
I believe it's 3 years now.
I thought,
Let's see. It's 24 months.
So 2 years.
Yes.
Can you get an extension?
You can always ask for it.
You can ask for it, but
Ask-
2 years is
ask
what
for everything,
law allows.
Well, I mean, privately, an insurer can agree to extend that time. Typically, you want to show some kind of efforts that you're proceeding forward with the work, getting a permit, getting an architect, doing the debris removal, so you're showing them that you're proceeding forward and you need more time.
No, I'm talking about replacement. I don't want to rebuild the house.
Again, you can privately ask your insurance company for an extension.
Okay.
And so here's the statute information on the replacement home. Issues that come up with that is there are tax consequences for that. The inclusion of extended coverage and the amount available to buy the new home. There's still, the buying a replacement house was actually settled after the 2007 fires, and there was a legislator passed legislation that allowed people to buy a replacement house. And then once it came time to implement that, there became a lot of issues, and so this latest legislation is a clarification of that to try to settle the issues that UP and policyholders and public adjusters across the state were having with their clients to say, I know the law says this, but we're not able to get resolution on these issues, and so they attempted to tackle that. Unfortunately, the land value deduction is still an open issue of law. The land is not insured. Your policy is to cover the house, the dwelling, contents, landscaping, all of that. It should be irrelevant. It doesn't matter. You're going to own that lot regardless, right? If you didn't rebuild and you wanted to buy, you should just be able to buy the replacement home. It becomes an issue when you're taking those proceeds and they're looking at the purchase price, not the home value there for the new home purchase price. And so you'll have questions raised by the adjuster of it's that unjust enrichment. Especially if the new home, including the land, is the same price. Your argument is it's a lesser home because I'm buying the land and the house.
Well,
But just being aware that there's sometimes issues with that.
the home may be worth the same amount, but the land may be worth half. So if you take the $500,000 home here,
Yeah.
and you put the home in San Fernando Valley, it's worth half of the land is half the value, we'll say.
Right, and so the house is the house, and so your argument is that the land is not insured. I was insured, my house was insured, and that's what we're talking about in this claim. And this is the CDI, so if council, the letter from April 3rd, 2008. So if a homeowner has an extended guaranteed replacement cost when rebuilt in the new location, are you entitled to the extended or guaranteed portion of coverage? Yes. And based on that, I had a friend who lost his house in 2007 who did rebuild. He actually went and bought a burned parcel in a different part of our community and rebuild, and he was able to capture that. It was just a longer process because he was educating his insurer on a new piece of legislation. So question 3, if a homeowner purchases a home in a new location for less than the cost to rebuild, are you entitled to cover the full amount it would cost to rebuild the original location? No. You've replaced the home, and then whatever point that is, you're there. So for example, if you had no mortgage on your home and you lost a 4-bedroom and you decided, you know what, we're going to downsize, I don't want the second story, we need a 2-bedroom and we're set. When you replace that home, that's it. You've replaced your home and you've made that agreement. Now if you have a mortgage, you're insured for what that house was. And so the mortgage company has a vested interest in the loan that they've made you for that. So there's an obligation there to rebuild to meet whatever you agree with them on. So for more information about buy or rebuild, here's the information on our website. And then I'm going to stop here because I'd like to be able to offer an opportunity for questions, and then I'll touch on the healing and dealing after. So any questions for Masood?